You're listening to the CD Baby DIY Music Podcast. Well, we're back with another edition of the CD Baby DIY Musician Podcast. This is, I think, episode 17. Is that what we're up to?
Up to 17.
We're here with the usual crew, myself, Kevin, Robert, Jordan, and Chris.
Hey.
Everyone doing good?
Very good.
Well, we wanted to start out by catching up with you, Robert. You have been doing the Album in a Month challenge.
Yeah.
Why don't you explain a little bit about what that is?
He's insane.
It's kind of a ridiculous challenge, and it all started with this guy down in the Bay Area, Chris Batty, started National Novel Writing Month, and it's really taken off, and I think thousands of people participate every year. And for the month of November, they try to write a novel. People who finish or get from point A to point B get declared a winner.
So everyone wins?
So everyone who finishes wins. That's the goal.
I love those kind of contests.
Exactly. There's a similar thing. Somebody just started called the National Solo Album Month. The idea is that you're going to write and record an album completely by yourself in the month of November and publish it by the end of November, on your website or whatever, so people can listen. There's about 150 participants who've signed up. I know there's actually some people here at CD Baby who are doing it who haven't actually put their name up on the website. We'll put a link to that if you want to check it out. And hopefully I'll have something to show you guys by the end of the month.
How many songs do you have done so far?
Yeah. It's really hard to stay organized and know what I've done and what I haven't.
That's not sounding too good.
Yeah. But I have like 7 or 8 songs started.
Is there a minimum song requirement or like a time length?
Well, they want it to be based on like some short albums. They figure that it shouldn't be under 30 minutes. I was going to try to do 10 songs. I don't think I'm quite up to 10 songs. It says you can do a cover song, but I don't know if I'm actually going to do a cover song. That might be something I have to whip out at the last minute if I don't have the time requirement.
5 cover songs right at the last minute.
But it's been really educational. I mean, I think that it's the process, and you learn so much about your own creativity being forced to do something like that in a short period of time, because I usually write a song in a month, maybe. Or a few months, but writing a whole album in a month is just ridiculous, and it's completely changed my songwriting process.
Well, plus part of the challenge also is that you completely record it yourself as well. It's not just a matter of writing it and then going to a studio and tracking it. You're supposed to do the whole thing yourself.
Yeah, I'm doing keyboard parts and bass parts, and I'm programming drums and, doing the whole shebang. And I'm using GarageBand, which is just great for that. I mean, I'm definitely pushing it to its limit because it kind of gets a little bit overloaded sometimes.
Yeah.
Oh, look, there's someone looking in through the window.
Visitor.
Hi, Ben.
Edit.
I imagine, speaking of editing, you probably have to kind of shut your internal editor off a bit and just go with the flow, right?
A lot of what I've been doing is just like, I'm going to start with an A chord. This is the A chord song.
This is the A chord song.
And that's how I was naming it at first. It was like, okay, this one will be the D chord song. I'll start strumming and maybe go to one other chord, trying to keep it as simple as possible. I mean, I can put all the icing on later. And well, the interesting thing is, too, is my ideas are going directly onto tape, and then I'm editing them on the computer rather than where I'd normally write a song. I'd be, in my room. Like, basically the whole creative process is almost happening inside the computer, which is very different than I'm used to.
Yeah.
That'd be a good thing for someone like me to try who's pretty anal about every little detail of the song.
Well, your comments about turning off your internal editor reminded me of a good quote I saw somewhere. I just wish I could remember it. But it had something to do with the creative process has nothing to do with the editing process, and just being able to set that aside and let the creativity flow even if you hate it. Mm-hmm. But the quote put it together much more succinctly. I just can't remember it.
Brian Eno, the producer, had those cards called oblique strategies that he would throw out on the studio floor, and you'd pick one, and that was supposed to be sort of your mission for that day of recording. And one of them said, sounds great, keep going. I always like that one because it's like you get stuck, you reach for the card. No, you're fine.
Sounds great.
Well, and then there was Phil Spector who just put a gun to your head.
That gets results as well.
There's a story that I always like to bring up when it comes to songwriting, and I don't know how reliable either my sources or Bob Dylan or Leonard Cohen are, but they're both some of our greatest American songwriters, well, Canadian and American songwriters.
North American
songwriters, there we go. Apparently, after a show in Paris, Bob Dylan visited Leonard Cohen. He was talking to Leonard Cohen about his song Hallelujah, and he was like, God, how long did it take you to write that song? And Leonard Cohen said, well, the better part of 2 years. Later, I actually was reading this article that he said it may have even taken longer than that. Hallelujah, it's not that complicated of a song, but it probably, more of a spiritual process than anything else. Later in the conversation, Leonard Cohen asked the same question of Bob Dylan in one of his songs, and whereas Leonard Cohen said the better part of 2 years, Dylan mentioned that it had taken him the better part of 15 minutes to write the song.
That shows, though.
Yeah.
I think Leonard Cohen's much more careful in his writing. He would fill up notebooks and then all of the same song, and then just pick the best stanzas or verses.
Yeah. And that's how I usually write. So this is the first time I've tried to write like Bob Dylan. We'll see what happens.
Well, we'll check back with you on the next Roundtable edition of the podcast, and hopefully we'll have something to play.
Yeah.
So, because by then it should be the end of, it goes through November, right? Is that correct? Okay. Well, cool. Well, one thing I wanted to mention that I did recently was I went to a music seminar for the first time. I've been to like the giant convention music things. This was the first time I'd gone to just a small, intimate music seminar put on by NARIS. They're the Grammy people, and it was the Pacific Northwest chapter. And it was really cool. It was a good experience. And later on in the podcast, I'm going to do a little seminar wrap-up segment, give you some tips and tricks I heard while I was there, and also how to make the best of the ticket price and make it worth your while. So that'll be coming up later in the episode.
Cool.
Let's move on to talking about record labels. We had Dylan McGarrick from Bad Man Recording Company. Dylan was great, and it was great having him actually divulge some really detailed points about what his contracts have and things like that. Sometimes people aren't as willing to share that. Thoughts, comments?
I didn't think this so much about Dylan's deal that he generally has with his artists, because I'm kind of familiar with that type of setup now. But I remember the first time I ever heard about a 50-50 split, I was really horrified because, you're presenting the label with a finished album and they can say yes or no to putting it out. It's like you've put in all that money, all that time, and then they want half of it.
Yeah.
But understanding now what labels do, getting publicists and bookers and all, sort of your whole team on board with you, it seems like a really fair split. This is a lot better than you get with a major anyway.
Yeah.
So.
When I interviewed Dylan, I didn't know the details beforehand, and the band I was in, Small Town Poets, was on a major label in the EMI system, and when he told me it was a 50-50 split, I had the opposite reaction. I was like, wow, that's very generous. and I think I even said that in the interview or afterwards. He was like, really? Thank you. And he's worked in the major label system, like he worked in distribution for Geffen, so he mentioned in the interview how he saw how bands were treated and how a lot of them didn't know where the money was going or how it was being spent on their records. And so the one thing along the lines of what you're saying, Chris, is I think a lot of times bands don't quite understand that the label's in it to make money as well. Their business is selling records, and so of course they're going to take a cut. They're going to take.
Yeah, that's just it. They're the business side of it. You do the creative stuff, they do the business stuff, and it has to be kind of a 50-50 partnership. So it makes sense to split the money that same way. I mean, if he's going to spend $10,000 in promotion, what did you spend on the record? $2,000 or $3,000 plus the time and the creativity, but it seems to even out.
And I guess the people that are making the deals, shaking hands, sending out the envelope, those are the people that make a little more money, and the creative types who get to do the fun stuff maybe don't make as much.
Or they could chip in and lick some envelopes. And,
exactly.
Or stamps.
A couple things that he said that I thought were standout points was he did mention along those lines that it's a partnership. That they're trying to work with the band, but, they have their motives as well, and that's to make money. I think that's one thing that's changed a lot in the past couple of years with indie labels. I think what Dylan is offering, and there's a lot of labels offering similar things, is a very fair deal to artists. Like you mentioned, a major label deal, it's not going to be that good. But, there's a downside where, Dylan's label isn't going to have all the marketing power, the media connections that a major label is, but, it's a trade-off. And the other thing Dylan also hit on was that maybe you don't need a label. And I think we're to the point where artists need to realize that a lot of times you really don't need a label, or you're not to that point. Signing a record deal isn't winning the lottery. It's moving up to the next step. And I think a lot of people, artists, especially younger artists, see it as I'm winning the lottery and I've been chosen, like American Idol or something. But if you're not ready for that point, you're not going to come out successful on the other end either, because as much as they are going to be doing a lot for you, there's a lot that's going to be expected of you to fill those shoes.
A lot of artists also don't know a lot about the business side of it, so they get lost in the shuffle. They kind of need the label to take care of that stuff because they just don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Right. They haven't been listening to the CD Baby podcast.
That's right. I mentioned that a little bit. Sometimes as an indie artist, it can get to a point where it's overwhelming and you can't handle that. And I think that is the point where it is good to consider your label options. I remember a conversation I had with this indie band that had some things going for them here in Portland. I was, kind of telling them some stuff about, you don't need to sign with a record company. You're not to that point yet. Have you done this or that? And have you built your fan base to this point or whatever? And all he could say is, I just want to be with the label. I just want to be with the label. And it's
like you can hand off all the responsibility.
There's no place like home.
Yeah, it's like, I don't think you quite understand what a label does, because if you do sign with a record company and you don't deliver the record sales or
to touring for 6 months a year or something like that,
then you're just going to be back where you started anyway, and they're not going to be happy with you.
I know with the small record label in San Francisco, Turn Records, that my band of 5 or 6 years ago signed with, it was really kind of a loose verbal contract, but we were really excited about it at the time. And that was the one thing that he kept on telling us, was that he was like, you guys, when are you going on tour next? When are you going on tour next? And we're like, what? We just got signed. We don't need to go on tour. We're big time now.
It's funny, like working at CD Baby, of course, we're always encouraging the independent spirit and that whole DIY, do-it-yourself thing, but it's a little simplified view because you really can't do it yourself. I mean, you have to either be the leader of a team that's sort of responsibly put together with a publicist and a booker and whatever else you might need, college radio promotion or something. But
I think when you get to a certain level, the whole DIY spirit of it is making sure that you realize you're the boss.
Right.
I think I've experienced it firsthand where at times other people, whether it be management or the record company, can easily become the boss of your career. But it's your music career, whether you sign a contract or not, whether you have management or not. And you just need to keep that in mind as you make decisions and no matter what level you're at. If you start handing off decision-making processes to everybody else and not keeping yourself informed on what contracts you're signing and really knowing what you're doing with your music, it's going to eventually bite you in the end. So, I mean, that's the one thing you got to remember. It's your career. And, if you don't want to tour as much as someone's telling you need to tour, then there may be some downsides to like a company doesn't want to work with you. But in the end, it's what you can handle and what's going to make your career fulfilling for you and not line the pockets of somebody else.
Yeah, definitely.
I just thought of this story. I have this friend that went to a music conference in Portland that Dylan actually sat on. My friend was basically saying, hey, I'm a pretty successful business owner. I don't want to tour a lot, but I've got this record. What can I do with it? Sort of what's the limit of what I can expect out of this, and how should I go about it? And everyone on the panel apparently was like, quit your job, go on the road, except Dylan. Dylan just sort of sat quietly and I think sweated as this kid took a railing. But anyways, I mean, the guy makes a lot of money. He's not going to quit his job.
Right.
And everyone was just pressuring him into, quit your day job, get on the road. And he was sort of like, no, I've defined what I want. I just want to know how to get there. And I think people are either like, go with a label or get out of the way. Kinda, so.
Well, it's like I Am Jen. There's, there are alternatives out there to how you're going to manage your career, and as technology advances, more and more opportunities for that.
And not only that, going along the lines with what you're doing with writing a record in a month, things like that can draw interest to music, just like, what Jonathan Colton did, only he was doing it every week for a year. And there's a lot of ideas out there that, don't require you to leave town or even play shows. The seminar I went to.
You can play shows in Second Life.
That's true.
You can tour
If you're
the
Suzanne
virtual
Vega.
world.
The virtual world. The seminar I went to is funny because the panel, I only saw half the panel. And it was all record company people, and we got there when it was already half over, and someone was asking about how do I, if I've got a big following in Seattle or something, I want to go down the coast and play, what should I do? And they all just kind of looked at each other. They didn't know, how to break into another market or whatever. It was just kind of interesting to see them just all stumped like, we don't know. And these were some big time people like that worked with some, like one of them was the manager for Beck. So it was just kind of funny that
They're presented with the people that already have followings.
yeah,
Probably,
and they really didn't have any good advice. And I was thinking of our little gig sharing thing, that the idea of contacting a band, like looking at MySpace and seeing who's popular in San Francisco and offering to swap, you open for them in San Francisco and they open for you in Portland or whatever. And I thought, that's some good advice that we gave. Apparently the big time label people haven't caught on to
They
that.
haven't gotten that far yet. Yeah.
Anything else that you guys wanted to mention about labels and what Dylan had to say?
I thought it was interesting that he doesn't advance any sort of recording budget. It's up to the artists to do that, and then he takes care of the rest, and it's them investing as well as him investing. And I thought that was interesting. I don't know if that's normal for
I
a
think-
small label.
I think with indie label, that's pretty normal these days.
It leaves him in a position to say no to the record, too, if he's not totally thrilled with it. I think it seemed like he was doing record-by-record contracts.
Yeah,
so.
and actually, we had a listener, Monty, who emailed in a bunch of questions that he was hoping we could ask kind of his follow-up with Dylan. I didn't have a chance to track Dylan down before we recorded this. That was one of his questions. He was wondering how long Dylan's contracts typically are, and I think he mentioned maybe after we were done recording the interview that they were just like one-off deals, which with an indie record company is going to be pretty standard. And honestly, that's truly best for the artist. I remember when we signed our deal, it was like one record or two records with the option of 6 total. And we're like, cool, we're locked in for 6 records. And then, after the first record did so well, you're kind of thinking,
Can
we
I get
have
a
no
bigger deal?
negotiating power here. That kind of blows everything. You really don't want to be locked in for a lot of albums because when you're a new band, you're thinking, cool, I'm going to be around for 6 albums.
Right.
But they're going to drop you anyway if you don't perform. So you might as well not make any long-term commitments if you do well.
Totally.
So another one Monty was wondering is if Dylan would sell his college radio list, and I'm pretty sure Dylan wouldn't. I don't know the radio promoter he got that from, but I think he gave some advice in that if you're using a radio promotion company, chances are they'll give you some labels and you can just copy off those labels. Isn't that what you did? Or was that with some press contacts that you did, Chris?
Yeah, it was a publicist that I've been working with, and basically gave me the labels for about 400 contacts, and it was up to me to send the stuff out, print up the bio and the cover letter and all that stuff, and stuff the envelopes, and it was a pain. But again, I'm not paying the publicist to do the office work. I'm paying him for his contacts and his,
Right.
And it's going out.
That's true.
I did my internship at a college radio promotion company, and that's what they would do. At least it's going out there, and you're not paying us, and then we're just sticking the albums on the shelves. And
So you guys would just provide the labels or information or
yep,
whatever.
and then we'd send it to the artists, and they mail them out, and we'd give them the radio stations to send it to. And
Yeah, you might be able to find a list on the internet. Did you guys sell the list to the artist, or did they?
it was part of the package.
Part of the package.
So once they paid up front, they had access to that pretty
Right.
much.
The important thing was, I have the list of this publicist that I'm working with, but what's that going to do for me? Because he's the guy that has the relationships with all these people and the phone numbers and emails. All I have is their address. And
Right.
Yeah, and then that's something important to mention with radio promotion and publicity is that with a typical radio promotion place, they're not just sending CDs to radio stations. They actually make follow-up calls and talk to the music director, program director, and, did you listen to the CD? Do you think you can add it this date or whatever? So there is that whole follow-up aspect and kind of rapport that you're not going to have just as an artist obtaining a list from somewhere.
or
So-
time.
Or time, yeah, that's a biggie because it's very time consuming. My recommendation would be just to, if you're interested in radio, target a couple college radio stations in your area for starters. Maybe build some relationships with those promoters, and then, if they see you in your local community really pushing a record that you've released, chances are they may give it a shot. Radio's a tough one though.
Yeah. Well, and there's so many other mediums competing with radio these days too, on the old interweb.
And another one of Monty's questions was any advice on how to find a good publicist, or advice of avoiding a bad publicist. And we're actually lining up a publicist to be on the podcast in a future episode. I think the best advice for something like that is to ask bands that they've worked with if they did a good job, if they did a bad job, if it was worth the money. He also asks what a typical publicist might cost, and I don't have any hard numbers for that. I know a friend of mine who has a kind of an indie label was paying $1,800 a month for a publicist out of Nashville, but that was a little bigger indie label, but it has, had pretty big distribution and stuff.
When I was looking before I put my latest record out, I found stuff as low as $250 a month, and as high as $2,000 a month, and then most of them want to lock you in for 2-3 month minimum.
Yeah.
But I knew the guy I ended up working with. I asked around people that he had done work for and got recommendations, testimonials, all that kind of stuff.
Do your homework.
Yeah, even when talking about record labels, whether it's a small indie label or something larger, talk to the bands that have dealt with those people before. Make sure you read through the contracts, be thorough, because it can be an exciting point in your career, but it can also be something that's a bigger headache than it was ever worth if you don't do your homework. But those were some good questions sent in by Monty. I'm hoping that we didn't miss anything. There's a couple I wouldn't know. They were more specific to Dylan. Like, he was curious about how much. Dylan mentioned that they spent about $10,000 on marketing a record, and he was curious at how that $10,000 broke down. So I'm sure a good portion of it goes towards a publicist, because I think that he mentioned that was one of the main points of what they spent money on. So, and the other thing that I found interesting with Dylan's conversation is he talked about how much they do a lot of promotion in listening stations. I never really thought about listening stations until I had that conversation with him, but that's basically how I've bought most of the albums I've bought in record stores, is the stuff that's in the listening station.
Right. The listening station is just where you go up and throw the headphones on, and they've got 5 or 10 albums or whatever you can choose from.
Yeah, and there's a store here in Portland I used to go to all the time just to listen to the stations because they had a lot of them. But I didn't realize that it was that affordable to, on average, to get your band in a listening station. So I would highly recommend doing something like that, and especially in your market where you're playing a lot. It seems like it's, he said on average about $100 a month. That's pretty low risk for the potential of, turning on a lot of people to your music.
I don't know how possible that is at a place like Tower Records. Oh, actually, they're not even open anymore. But, a big chain, but definitely small indie stores would be.
Yeah, and I would always start at the small indie. And when we say small indie, they're not necessarily small stores, but they're just not giant, big box corporation stores.
Yeah.
Because the one here in Portland that I would go to a bunch is a gigantic store, and they just have tons of indie music. So. Hey there, this is Kevin with our DIY segment, a segment where we like to give you a quick tip or a bit of info that you can use to help move your music forward. This time around, I wanted to talk about music seminars and music conferences. I recently attended a music conference up in Seattle called the Music Tech 07 Conference. It was put on by the Pacific Northwest chapter of NARIS, the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences. They're the ones that put on the Grammy Awards. It was my first time attending a conference like this, and since these types of conferences have been popping up all over the place, I figured it would be good to check one out and report back to all of you. First of all, if you've never attended a conference like this or you've never read anything about them, they are typically 1 to 2 day events that feature panel discussions on a number of topics related to the music business. Tickets for this conference were $100 for 2 days and $75 for 1 day. Most conferences and seminars will incorporate professionals from all aspects of the industry, and I have to say the list of guest panelists for this particular conference was quite impressive. There were representatives from mainstream labels and indie labels. ASCAP and BMI were there. Several digital distribution companies and digital retailers were in attendance, as well as a congressman from the U.S. House of Representatives. The general discussion at the Music Tech Conference was focused around the new digital frontier and how that technology is changing the music business. Some of the panel topics were the look of the new record label and the future of digital distribution, and my favorite, monetizing music in the digital age, which covered new opportunities that are out there for the indie artist, and a lot of them were opportunities that didn't exist in years past. Throughout the day, the panelists provided great discussion and shared some excellent insight to the state of affairs in the industry. But the number one benefit to attending an event like this one, and the reason I wanted to mention it on the podcast, is that they provide a chance to meet and network with other industry professionals in a casual and safe environment. And by safe, I mean that the guest speakers are there to talk to you, the conference attendee. You're not catching them off guard at work or filling up their inbox with random emails. So that being said, I think there are a couple things you can do to make your brief interactions and network opportunities more productive. First of all, make sure you do a little research on the panelists before the day of the conference. Your time is going to be limited, so it's good to have a short list of people that you know you'd like to meet during the event. Bring something to take notes. After sitting through 4 hour-and-a-half panels back to back to back, my brain was like mush. So be sure to take notes, as there will be many nuggets of information that will probably stir up some questions or be good conversation starters. Stay all day long. It's typical for a conference to have a meet and greet session at the end of the day, and this conference was no different. They had a meet and greet time at a bar that was just a couple blocks away, and I was surprised to see how few conference attendees actually came to the meet and greet time. At one point, it seemed like there were more panelists than conference attendees at the meet and greet time, so be sure to take advantage of that. It's a great time to have one-on-one conversations with that person in the industry that you may not have a chance to talk to again. So in closing, I just wanted to say that there are dozens of conferences out there, from recording to music promotion to whatever aspect of the industry you're interested in. Before you lay down the cash for a ticket, make sure that the conference you're considering can help meet some of your goals, or at least point you in the right direction. If you do that first and go with the intention of taking time to talk to some of the people there, I think that you'll find that music seminars and conferences can be a great investment for your career. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the CD Baby DIY Musician Podcast. And be sure to check out the website, cdbabypodcast.com. Always feel free to email us your feedback, questions, or comments to info@cdbabypodcast.com.
Thank you. And leave a good word on iTunes for us.
That's right. Actually, we got an insider tip. That is the main way that their editorial crew finds podcasts. I don't know if it's the same for music, but that's the...
Yeah, well, they've only got 3 people in there.
Yeah, we found out for their podcast staff, they only have 3 people, so...
Little Bird told us.
Little Bird told us. Sat on Robert's shoulder and told him, so...
Whispered in my ear. It's a little bird that gives me all my insider information.
So if you're enjoying the show, please head over there and leave a positive comment, and it'll help us spread the word. And so we can keep doing this, finding other great sources of indie inspiration for you.
Speaking of that, Jordan had a few shout-outs.
Yeah, so we have a new button on our website, Buy Us a Cup of Joe, and we'd just like to thank a few contributors, Carol in Chestnut Hill, Mass, and Liquid Records out of Utah, and then also Andrew Dubber.
Yay! Who's in the UK.
Who's in the UK.
Yeah, Andrew Dubber is a great blogger. We have a link on our website to his blog. It's really cool. You should definitely check it out. He's a smart guy.
Musicstrategies.com. NewMusicStrategies.com. I said musicstrategies.com.
We got his name wrong last time.
So
we can't get anything
now
right.
We can't get his website right. What kind of podcasters are we?
But we appreciate those of you who contributed. We in the Northwest are coffee fanatics, and that's what keeps the podcast going. Many late nights of editing.
Keep us caffeinated.
That's right. I wish I just had a coffee dispenser attached to my computer. That would do the trick.
Yeah, with a little IV tube.
Just
maybe.
straight IV, that would help too. You've been listening to the CD Baby DIY Music Podcast, broadcasting from Portland, Oregon, USA.
What kind of podcasters are we?